financial markets in turmoil.
What are the root causes of the financial crisis?
The dollar losing value.
Heading for its biggest loss in nearly 3 decades.
Will Social Security even be there?
I don't know.
Buy or rent?
That's a very good question.
Interest rates.
I'm not so sure.
Where do you put your money?
I don't know.
Welcome to the show that answers your questions. This is Follow the Money Weekly with your host, economist, and best-selling author. Here's Jerry Robinson.
It's online at ftmdaily.com. That stands for Follow the Money Daily. You can find us there. You can also find us on Facebook, facebook.com/FTMDaily. You can also get our news feed right there on Facebook or on our website. Right there, if you click the news tab, every single hour we're putting out a brand new news story, something that's happening around the globe, probably economic or investing or geopolitical, along with a sentence or two about my thoughts about that particular news story. There's so much happening around the world, and we could talk quite a bit about that on today's program. But before we talk about anything, I want to just kind of reorient ourselves as to what's really happening in this global economy. What's happening right now? You know, we have so many new listeners each and every week, thanks to iTunes and iHeartRadio and many different outlets out there that are promoting our work. And I want to refamiliarize some of you and familiarize others of you with really what this show is all about. You know, I started this show back in 2010 in response to a tremendous amount of angst within America. There were tremendous amounts of people out there as I was traveling around the country promoting the book Bankruptcy of Our Nation. And I saw a lot of people who just needed answers. They heard a lot of problems. They heard all about the issues, but they were lacking on solutions. They didn't have anything to implement. What do I do here? How do I go forward? And that's whenever we created this podcast and this website. It was in 2010. And, you know, it's just been wonderful ever since. My wife and I, Jennifer, have been running this website. We have been running this podcast and, of course, producing all kinds of information on our website for you. And it's been an absolute blessing and honor to meet all of the people that we have. It's just been an amazing experience here at FTM Daily for us. And so we want to thank you, first of all, the listener, for tuning in each week, supporting us, whether you're one of our subscribers, paid subscribers, or whether you're just somebody who loves the show and tries to tune in and catch the stuff that we're saying. I want to thank you for your support. It means a lot to us. Now, it was a few years ago that I was living in the middle of Houston, Texas. For those of you who are new to the show, you may not know the story, but we moved out of the big city of Houston. We were down there for business. We had launched another business down there, and it's still going. We have somebody managing it now. But we had decided that it was time to get out of the city, and we decided to move, and we began to look at different areas. We began to look at different states, and we literally took out a pad of paper and a pen and began to write down what cities would we want to move to, what states would we want to consider. We were living in Texas at the time, and of course, down there's very low taxes, state taxes, income taxes. There are none. They make up for it in property taxes and other ways. But we were thinking, where are we going to move? Are we going to stay in Texas? We decided not to stay in Texas, and we began to do a study of, which states have low income taxes or no income taxes? Which states have no sales taxes? We started looking through the different tax rates of different states. One state that popped up quite often in our research was Wyoming. Another one was Idaho. Another one was Colorado to a certain extent. Of course, that had more to do with the beauty of that state at the time when we were going through our list. Many of these states that we found were out west. But another state that popped up on our search was Arkansas, and that's where we ended up moving to, northwestern Arkansas. We wanted to be somewhere where we would be close enough to a city, but to be sure that that city was not a very largely populated area. We really wanted to be near a city that had no more than 100,000 people, and we didn't want to be too close to the city. We wanted to be a little ways out from the city, but we could get to it and it would be convenient. So we ended up settling on northwest Arkansas, and we have just loved it since we moved out here. We moved from Houston. We came up to this area here. Real estate is very reasonable up here. The weather has been fairly compliant, although we did have a pretty cold winter. And what we did was we found a property that had many acres, enough for us to build a very nice garden and to have some livestock And we really decided to move away from the city slicker kind of mentality and move towards a self-sustaining kind of lifestyle. And of course, it's been a real big change, a shift, from living in a big city where you have all of these conveniences. You hop in the car and, 1 block down the street, you can, be at the convenience store. Well, that's not the case now. It's different. But I tell you, I wouldn't trade it for anything. It's been a wonderful experience, and we are just continuing to learn more about, the earth and how to garden and how to, to raise livestock, and how right now I'm working on our pond. I'm having to fill it in because it has a little bit of a leak, and been working on that, and just been learning so many things about, things that Americans and people living on this planet for such a long time, for the last several thousand years, have always had to deal with. It is a very new phenomenon today, friends, where we don't know where our food comes from. We are all so completely dependent upon corporations for virtually everything that we have. And in many ways, it is a convenience. In many ways, you could view it as a blessing. But I don't believe that the trajectory that we're on is going to allow that model to be sustainable forever. Our generation is the anomaly in history. We are the strange odd man out. If you go back throughout history, you find that most people had to grow their own food, or they had to produce something of value to trade for that food. You certainly just didn't look in the newspaper or on Craigslist and find a job. You actually had to produce something of value, or you had to find some other way to create money or to create an income in order to take care of yourself and your family. So we're a very different generation. It's a very different time. And because of my outlook, because of the way that I view the world, I do not believe that the current trajectory that we're on is sustainable. So I want to go through a list of some of the things that I've written down here. I was thinking about you this morning as I was preparing to come into the studio, and I was thinking, what can I tell you to help you understand, what we're thinking and what we're concerned about? What is really on our list of things that we're watching for? And I just want to go through these real briefly. First of all, we expect to see perhaps what will later be known as the largest stock market crash in U.S. history. Bigger than 1929, bigger than 2008. And we believe that lies ahead. Now, I don't have a date. My crystal ball is broken, as I've told you over and over again. That's why we developed our market barometer. The market barometer helps us understand what the actual trend is. And when the trend changes, like right now, the trend is going up. Remember, markets only go in one of 3 directions. They either go up, down, or sideways. And right now, the market is just going up. It's going up, 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 up because of all the printed money. Well, eventually, it'll top, and then it'll begin to go down. And when that actually occurs, our market barometer will tell us that it's time now to begin selling, or if you want to even go so far as to say shorting the market, as we did back in 2008. To make money on the way down. And so that's the purpose of our market barometer. And so number one is I believe that the stock market is going to crash, and this crash is going to be the largest crash in U.S. history. Now, this is what we said in our book, Bankruptcy of Our Nation. This is not some new idea that I've had, of course. In the very first edition of the book that we put out back in 2008, 2009, we had stated that the stock market would crash, which it did, and then it would rally, but it would be a major sucker rally, and then it would end in a devastating crash. So we're in the middle of this sucker rally that we had foreseen, which is all induced by the funny money being pumped out of the Federal Reserve, or that was pumped out of the Federal Reserve for the last several years. And now we're on the cusp of this new interest rate hike as the Fed is promising to begin raising rates. Now, I want to also go on record here and say that I'm not saying that the next crash is going to be that crash. I'm saying that we are going to experience a crash of seismic proportions that will have no other comparison. We will not be able to compare it to 1929. We will not be able to compare it to 2008. It will be a severe collapse. So that's number one. We definitely expect a major stock market crash in the future. Could it happen this year? Of course. Could it happen in 2016? Sure. It could happen any year. I don't know when it's going to happen, but I do know that it will, because we have a debt-based monetary system and a debt-based banking system and a paper money system, which is completely unsustainable. And number two, the second thing that I want to point your attention to is the U.S. dollar. Totally different from the U.S. stock market. Stock market can go down, dollar can go up, vice versa. Well, the dollar itself is dependent upon, as you know, and you've heard me speak about over and over again here, the petrodollar system. And if you're not familiar with that, go to ftmdaily.com/petrodollar. And there you can read the 4-part article series that we put together. It's been there for years. And it provides you with a basic understanding of why the U.S. dollar is imperiled, why it is going to face very, very tough times in the days ahead because its demand is artificial. Our global economy is very distorted, and now today, it's no longer the U.S. that sits at the top of the heap, but we have challengers who are climbing up, like China and like the European Union, who desire the benefits that come with regional hegemony or even global hegemony as we currently enjoy. So the number 2 thing that we're watching for, and these are not in order in any way, shape, or form, but just to kind of give you a list, the second thing I'm looking for is the U.S. dollar to crash when the petrodollar system implodes. Now, that could look like a couple of things. Number 1, we could see a headline that comes out that says Saudi Arabia is going to begin accepting euros in addition to dollars. Or we may see something like the Saudis decide to no longer take dollars, although I don't expect to see that kind of headline. I expect it to be more of a slow move. And perhaps we'll see the Saudis begin accepting euros, or maybe they'll begin accepting gold or yuan or something else, which will then dilute the demand for dollars, and it will begin the process of unwinding this petrodollar system. Number 3, it has to do with the euro and the European Union. I don't expect the European Union to go anywhere. We've been saying this since 2009. We do not expect the European Union to go away. We do not expect the euro to go away. Those who understand the globalist plan, how they want to create this one world currency or this one world government, it doesn't make any sense for you to believe that the eurozone or the euro currency is going to implode and go away, because this is how the globalists are working. This is what they're doing. They are building out regional types of economic unions that they can then duplicate and use as a template. So the European Union is a template. The euro currency is a template. You bring all of these different countries together, which is what the Europeans have done. All different languages, all different histories, all different cultures, different interest rates, different currencies, different economies, different unemployment rates, different inflation rates, different interest rates, everything. Everything is different. And you bring them together and you put them into one basket and you say, here's one currency for you to share and here is one interest rate for you all to have to deal with. And of course, that's going to be challenging. Of course, you're going to have those outliers like Greece and Spain and Portugal who cannot seem to really succeed in such a system. But that doesn't mean that the Eurozone and the euro currency is going to go away. In fact, it's quite the opposite. May I suggest that the globalists are actually using this time to refine their system to be able to use this template in other areas. We're beginning to see movement like this in the Far East, Asia Pacific, as China, South Korea, and Japan have announced their intentions to hold some very close economic talks and to begin talking about coming closer. Now, Asia has always been the tough area. From my perspective, I never fully grasped how they would ever get a regional currency or a single regional currency out there in that area. But we're beginning to see some movement towards that. You've also heard some of the conspiracy theories about the North American Union, no doubt, where the United States, Mexico, and Canada would all be merged together and they would have a single currency called the Amero. That was actually proposed by Robert Pastor, who had close ties to the Council on Foreign Relations and actually wrote a book called Toward a North American Community, which envisioned, as I mentioned, Mexico, United States, and Canada all coming together, sharing a common currency. And of course, that was highly controversial at the time whenever it came out back in 2001. The concept has been batted around several times, and now it seems to have lost favor. But regardless, the point is that we still expect to see this template played out with Europe in other areas. We see something similar in the Middle East. The Gulf countries have been talking about having their own single currency in that region for I don't know how long. It seems as every year they restart the process, only to see it fail again. So number 3 is that I really believe that we're going to continue to see the European Union and the euro continue to remain solvent, and we will see a move towards other similar regional currencies, regional organizations, integration across the board. until we finally get to a place where they can finally merge all of these regional currency blocks and regional economic unions into one single, one world currency, one world government. I mean, that's really what this is all about. It's all about power. Sure, it's great if you can run America and be the president, or if you can run, China and be the premier. But what if you can run the whole world? This has always been the dream of the globalists. It's always been the dream of the maniacs who get into power. Napoleon, Hitler, Stalin, Mao. I mean, they all had these visions of grandeur, and they desired to rule over as much territory as possible. And that desire has not gone away. It still exists in the hearts of men, and it will eventually be fulfilled. I really believe that we will see the culmination of that. I'm going to leave you with one final trend before I bring on Tom Clow. We'll bring this to a close. We're going to be talking about all of these more in depth, by the way, on a webinar scheduled for tomorrow for all of our FTM insiders and pro traders. You'll have access to the monthly conference call. I'm going to be going through this topic, and I'm also going to be adding other trends that we're watching, specifically for our insiders to be paying attention to. You can become an FTM insider by going to ftmdaily.com/subscriptions. And there you can choose the plan that you'd want and then sign up and become a subscriber. And then you'll have access to the monthly conference call that we do. It's a video conference call we do once a month, usually involving an investment idea and an income idea. We'll be talking about some geopolitical things tomorrow, obviously, on this webinar. But the fourth trend that I want to talk about before we close is chaos coming to American cities. And this is one that I think is really going to shock many Americans that are not expecting this. And most of the people who will be shocked, obviously, will be living in major cities, big, major metropolises. We have got to a place today, friends, where we have become so dependent, as I mentioned earlier, on corporations and upon the government to take care of us, that when we finally realize that the emperor has no clothes and the government really can't afford to continue this unsustainable spending without raising taxes tremendously, whether it be on the wealthy or whether it be on the the middle class or whether it be on corporations, somebody's going to pay. And when these government services begin to decline, people are going to resort to violence. They're going to get angry in the streets, and we're going to see riots in America's cities. And I have no doubt about this at all, and I expect this in my lifetime. It's hard to imagine now, isn't it? It's the same thing back in 2007, 2006, whenever I was stomping across stages saying an economic collapse is coming, it's coming, and people would just, their eyes were glazed over, right? Because it was hard to imagine. I'm telling you right now in 2015 that I don't know when it's going to happen. I'm not putting a date on it, but we're going to see riots in the streets of America because government services will be on the decline because we simply cannot afford all of the things that Washington has promised to the people. And friends, this is when you do not want to be in the major cities. You don't want to be in a metropolis with 5 million, 6 million people when chaos ensues. This is a major reason why we moved out of the metropolis and moved into a very quiet, low population area. And another thing that we put on our list as we were trying to pick out a place to be was we wanted to be at least one full tank of gas away from a major metropolitan area. And we have achieved that with where we're at now. Because, if something really bad goes wrong, most people will be able to hop in their car on one full tank of gas and get somewhere, right? And you want to be out of that range from a major city wherever you decide to move. And not everybody who's listening to me is going to move out into the country. I'm certainly not suggesting that. I'm suggesting that you need to have a plan. We recently got a call from one of our insiders, and he had been following our work for a long time, and he was very seriously considering moving out into a less populated area. He lived in a major town out in California and still does. And he said, I like the idea of moving. I loved the idea of moving, in fact, but my kids are in school. My wife has a great job. I have a great job. It's just hard to get up and leave. And I totally understand that. I'm an investor. I'm a trader. And so I'm very mobile. Jennifer is an entrepreneur. She helps me with all the businesses that we have. So we're very mobile. We don't have that problem. But I totally sympathize with people who do because I've been there. And so what I told this gentleman was, that's okay. Plan B would be to simply have a piece of property that you buy somewhere that is far out enough away from you, maybe a little more than a tank of gas away from you. And that way you could head out to that area and maybe have like a little pop-up or a mobile home on it or something, like 1 acre, somewhere out in the middle of nowhere that you could go to if you had to. If you had to get out of Dodge, where would you go? And so maybe buying a piece of property somewhere like an acre somewhere out in the middle of nowhere and then having it as a plan B, it'd be very cheap to have. It'd be a nice little insurance policy for you just in case you ever need to get out of Dodge. So a quick summation of what we've had to say today on today's broadcast. Number one, we believe the biggest stock market crash in U.S. history is coming. We don't have a date. We're not providing you a date, but we are providing you tools to watch out for it with our market barometer, and you can learn more about that at our website. The second thing is that we believe that the U.S. dollar is going to implode eventually due to a collapse of the petrodollar system. And again, if you don't know much about that, you can read about the petrodollar system at ftmdaily.com/petrodollar. There's a tremendous amount of information there. Number three, we believe the euro and the eurozone are here to stay. We believe that the calls for them to be dismantled or the fact that they're going to implode have been overstated and wildly exaggerated. We believe that the euro is a globalist template for other currency blocks and economic unions to pattern themselves after, and we expect to see more of these before we finally see emerge towards a one world currency or a one world government, so to speak. And the fourth trend that we strongly believe is that chaos will be coming to America's cities as government services will simply not be able to keep up with the demand. We will see a decline in government services and an increase in taxes. And that's a major reason why my wife and I, my family, have moved out of the major city and into a very small community where we can better weather what we expect to see over the coming decades. Now, as I mentioned on tomorrow's webinar for all of our insiders, I'm going to go into more things. I'm going to talk specifically about China. I'm going to talk about Russia. I'm going to talk about potential wars that will be breaking out that we strongly believe are going to be occurring sometime within the next 18 to 24 months. And will provide many different solutions for people who want to find a way to prepare for these types of things. Everybody can feel in their gut that something's wrong. You can feel it. You can feel that something's wrong in the air. You see it on the TV. You see it on the news. You feel it in your gut. You know something's wrong. Well, that's just the first step. The next step is to take action, to do something about it, to prepare. And that will be the topic of our webinar tomorrow. So if you want to join us for that, I encourage you to become an FTM Insider. Go to ftmdaily.com/subscriptions. Select the Insider or the Pro Trader, and you'll get instant access to our webinars, plus all of the archives we've ever done. All of our webinars, you'll have instant access to watch all of them. And there's probably close to 100 of them on there by now. All right, well, before we bring Tom Cloud on to give us an update on precious metals, we have a little update ourselves on global platinum shortages. According to the Platinum Quarterly Report released by the World Platinum Investment Council, global platinum demand outstripped supply by 700,000 ounces last year, making this the third consecutive annual shortage of platinum, and 2015 is turning out to be no different, as analysts expect another deficit this year. Automotive, jewelry, and investment demand are all forecast to increase in the coming year for platinum. And, platinum is one of those metals that you don't hear too much about. You hear about gold, you hear about silver. Certainly, if you listen to Tom Cloud's update every single week here in our broadcast, you do hear about platinum. He does talk about it quite a bit. It's a unique precious metal with unique properties that make it invaluable in certain industrial applications. But we have long believed that its investment potential is still greatly underappreciated by most global investors. We have a link to the Platinum Quarterly Report released by the World Platinum Investment Council on our website on today's show notes. All right, without any further ado, let's head over now to our good friend, Tom Cloud, for an update on precious metals.
Follow the Money Weekly presents your precious metals market update. Here's Tom Cloud.
We had quite a week last week as the FOMC, Federal Open Market Committee, came in with a little dovish prediction. We're beginning to see a pattern here. They want to keep hard assets down and stocks up. We've gone now 18 months where they've talked about raising interest rates, and the economy has not been strong enough to raise interest rates. That tells you a lot, and certainly you begin to wonder now, like crying wolf, when or if they're going to be able to raise interest rates until the money really gets some velocity in the system. So one thing we've got to do is just continue to watch that very closely on that, and we had a great move in gold and silver last week as both moved up very strongly. And for silver, the ratio's gone back to 70 to 1. It's been between 75 and 80 to 1 for several months, where gold was 75 to 80 times more valuable. Now it's down to 70, and we expect that to continue to move that way a little while longer. I want to talk about a very big fundamental issue, two fundamental issues today, and rather than giving my version, I want to read you the version put out by Dr. Paul Craig Roberts, the Assistant Treasury Secretary under Ronald Reagan, who has his own website, which is an incredible place to pick information up if you haven't read any of Dr. Paul Craig Roberts' material on the government and where we are economically. But what I want to read to you today is what we followed up on last week, is the list of those joining the Asian Investment Bank. We talked about last week England joining, and then on Monday we saw Germany, France, and Italy all disregard the United States order as they wrote out to every country, basically promised them anything they want to stay in the SWIFT system, and they all turned it down. And what's going to be very interesting this week, as we'll know later in the week, we expect to hear from Australia, Japan, South Korea, Switzerland, and Luxembourg maybe joining also be joining the bank, the new bank there. And what Dr. Roberts says is very important. The Chinese-led bank will, of course, be much more effective. The Chinese will use the bank to actually help developing countries and thereby make friends and grow their trust in their SWIFT system, whereas Washington will use the banks, have always, for domination and dominion by force over these lesser countries and telling them where they're going to put their money. And this has been going on, and we've known this was coming, and we've known it was going to be China. We've talked about it for the last year, and this time has come, just like the time will come when the dollar is nearly worthless and the yuan takes over. This now is estimated to have over 70% of the world's transactions are going to be done through what they call the CIPS system, the Chinese industrial payment system, rather than the SWIFT U.S. system. This is going to be huge for gold. And the other thing that's going on, the other issue I want to talk to you about, is I will read once again from what Dr. Paul Craig Roberts said. In another illustration of financial power moving from the halls of Washington and England to the east, on Friday, March the 20th, which was 3 days ago, there will be a gold exchange that starts operating in China that will be open 23 hours a day and provide a physical wholesale trading platform. This will allow producers, banks, and large traders to avoid the LBMA, that's the London Bullion Market Association, from having their trades front-run by the bullion banks. Basically, these banks are similar to high-frequency traders, and that may have read about where an order is placed and another entity buys first and drives the price higher. All this is going away. And then finally, on April the 1st, after 3 years of lobby by different organizations in the gold business, the Financial Conduct Authority starts in the UK and will begin regulating gold and silver benchmarks. And there are 10 banks under investigation right now for price fixing by the Federal Trade Commission in the U.S. in the London situation. We now see that this is the banks that will be doing the new London fix that we've talked about. So things are moving the direction of transparency, honesty, integrity, and anyone that can't see this coming and what it's going to mean for gold, especially if the FTC or the London Bank, same situation, charges big fines against these banks. So people are much more reluctant today to go out and do this price fixing, knowing they're being watched. And this new organization, April the 1st in London, is huge. And they're just kind of pulling away from the U.S. and their laws and lack of transparency, just like we've had in the White House. We see it in everything to try to keep dishonest weight and measures in this country. And as I've talked about in my recent talk, God talks about abomination in very few things in the Bible, but dishonest weights and measures is one of them. He talks about 3 times about detestable and abomination to have dishonest weights and measures. Everything in the government should be transparent out there, no matter what it is. But unfortunately, that's not the way things are. So where is gold and silver right now? They're in a bull market. Technically, they're in a bull market from the transparent side we just talked about, and the fundamental side of the market on things that are developing. Everything right now is going our way. Does it mean the market's going to jump through the roof tomorrow? No. But what it does mean is there's going to be harder and harder for the people that try to sell these shorts and have nothing to back it. And gold and silver are moving so fast on this electronic trading. Now we're 23 hours a day. This is incredible. We've watched this system that started back in October, developed into the premier trading platform in the world for gold and silver. Now we're seeing it go one step further by going to 23 hours a day. And they'll just skip the LBMA altogether. So this is very important. I want to close this week's precious metals market update with a visibility thing. I was watching the Weather Channel the other night as I was just trying to see what my local weather was, and saw something on it that I thought, my gosh, why can't we as investors think the way the tsunami victims of Japan thought? First of all, I did watch this 14-year special the other night on the tsunami that hit Thailand in 2012, and 18,500 people were killed, and many of them could have been saved, but they kept, as they went through the 3 tidal waves, people kept thinking the first one was the last one, the second was the last one for sure, and then the third one ended up killing people that had come down from higher places, and they didn't stay until they were clear of danger. But the story that hit me on the Weather Channel that was amazing is, what did the Japanese do in 2010 after they got wiped out by a tsunami and over 3,500 people died and billions of dollars of property was lost? They immediately started preparing for the next one. So what did they do? They built a 236-mile wall that's several hundred yards off the ocean, 62 feet tall, 236 miles long. Are these people thinking ahead? Are these people thinking about their citizens? Are these people getting ready for a rainy day? Yes, they are. My question to you, are you getting ready for a rainy day? When you see the stock market where it is now, it doesn't take anybody with any experience to know, yes, it can run a little higher. It can run up 5 or 6% higher. But when it comes down, it's going to be a big drop, and in my personal opinion, it's going to be this year. I was talking Friday afternoon to a money manager that manages over $500 billion. He has 54% of his clients' money in stocks right now. He's down from 60%. He started pairing a little bit. But he said the whole thing is not if the stock market's going to, he said everybody in the business knows it's going to have a big drop. It's just who can play the musical chairs and be the last one out. Which leads me to the final thought, and that is, where are the bids going to be? Do you know how markets operate in stocks and bonds? When the market starts dropping, a market maker, you have to have a seller. When you want to sell, you have to have a buyer to buy the other side of the trade. So what's happened in every major stock market drop every 7 years, starting with 73, and yes, 2015 is the 7th year that we've talked about in the past, you've got to have someone making bids. So what happens is they see the market's dropping, so they put ridiculous bids on, knowing you won't hit them. So they go through layers, and nobody stops the drop. And finally, you hit that bid, and you sell a stock for 10 or 15% lower than you started trying to sell it when you first started. So you've got to be ready for this, and you've got to increase your hard asset percentage now rather than waiting with all this electronic trading and the physical market dwindling in the U.S., everything moving to the east. You need to be buying methodically right now, and especially silver, that is still over $2 below mining cost, even though it moved up $1.40 last week, nearly 10% in 1 week. Just like we said, when it moves, it's going to move quick. So hopefully this has helped you, and I can paint a picture to get ready. And once again, if you need to get in contact with me, you can reach me at 800-247-2812. That's 800-247-2812. And if you if you want an IRA for gold and silver, a self-directed precious metals IRA, we'd be happy to talk to you about it. Just give us a call and we'll be glad to go over it. And those of you that are still holding rare coins, hoping for an up market, we'd like to discuss with you too, because in my opinion, and based on the track record and where my expertise tells me we're going, you need to get out of that and get into bullion before the next move. So hopefully this has been helpful to you this week, and we painted some images that we hope will help you with your investment portfolio. With this week's Precious Metals Market Update, this is Tom Cloud signing out.
Hey friends, this is Jerry Robinson from Follow the Money Weekly. Recently, we have been receiving many emails from our listeners commenting on the great help they're getting from our precious metals expert, Tom Cloud. Gold and silver are excellent hedges against the growing threat of coming U.S. inflation. Who's your gold guy? Make it Tom Cloud. With over 30 years experience with precious metals, Tom will answer all of your questions. Don't buy your gold and silver through some call center and pay inflated prices. Call my good friend Tom Cloud and speak directly with him and get all of your questions answered. For a limited time, Tom is offering free shipping and insurance on every gold and silver purchase made by our listeners. Call 800-247-2812. And when you do, tell him that Jerry Robinson from Follow the Money Weekly sent you, and he'll throw in that free shipping and insurance on your entire order. Call your gold guy, Tom Cloud, right now for the very best deals on gold and silver coins. 800-247-2812. That is 800-247-2812. Well, news that Sweden is standing up to the bully of Saudi Arabia. Sweden now standing up for human rights in Saudi Arabia, calling on the Saudis to improve their human rights record, or else. In essence, the Sweden has decided to call off its defense ties with the Saudi kingdom until, and not until, the human rights situation in Saudi Arabia is rectified. Right now, Saudi Arabia is, of course, repressing women. They're repressing religious minorities of all flavors. In fact, if you carry a Bible or caught with a Bible in Saudi Arabia, the punishment can often include death. People are living in fear in Saudi Arabia, and yet, friends, Saudi Arabia, of course, is, by all accounts, even in the mainstream media, they have admitted that ISIS is being funded by who? Saudi Arabia, Qatar, these nations over there in the Gulf that are fostering this terrorism that's being spread across the Middle East. And yet the mainstream press has us focused on what? They have us focused on Iran. Iran, which does not have a nuclear weapon. Saudi Arabia, according to numerous reports, already have nuclear weapons sitting in Pakistan waiting for delivery as soon as Iran actually gives the green light that it's going to be producing nuclear weapons. So the Saudis already have nuclear weapons. They repress their religious minorities. They repress women. They have a terrible human rights record. They hate Christians. They hate the Jews. In fact, you think about it. Remember the 1948 War of Independence with Israel? Who was leading that charge? Well, no doubt about it, the Saudi Arabians were among those who invaded in 1948. Iran was not part of that war. How about 1967? The same thing. The Saudi Arabians played a key role in that war, played a very supportive role. And of course, Iran was not involved. In fact, you can't even find an instance where Iran has invaded a foreign country in decades. It's been a very, very long time, maybe even a century or two. I can't think of a single country that Iran in recent years has invaded. Even in the Iran-Iraq war, it was provoked by Iraq. A U.S.-funded Iraq, I should state. But of course, we also armed the other side. That's what, of course, the Iran-Contra hearings were all about. You remember the Iran-Contra hearings, right? Ollie North, who now has a TV show on Fox News, or at least used to, and President Ronald Reagan, who had called the Taliban similar, or he had compared them to the founding fathers of America, calling them freedom fighters as they sat in the White House. Pictures of this on our website, ftmdaily.com. And on top of that, Reagan overseeing and, of course, caught in the political scandal that was the Iran-Contra affair, where senior administration officials within the Reagan administration covertly were overseeing the arming of Iran and then taking the money from the sales to Iran and then using it to funnel it to the rebels in Nicaragua, known as the Contras. This was called Iran-gate, Contra-gate, the Iran-Contra affair. You can go back and look that up. But, again, most people forget about all of these things. They just tend to think about what's at stake right now, or what are we facing right now. And this rush to a judgment has been extremely bizarre in the case of Iran. And I'll tell you this, Saudi Arabia, I'm with you on Iran. If you want to starve them of nuclear weapons, if you want to prevent them from ever having nuclear weapons, I'm with you. But what I don't understand is why people who are for that are not also foaming at the mouth over Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia is exactly the same threat. It's exactly the same problem. It is a Trojan horse, and America is completely ignoring it. The Saudis are not the friends of the West. They are not friends. They are not our allies. They may look like they're our allies. They may act like they're our allies, but Saudi Arabia is not an ally of the United States. They are a hired friend. That's what they are. They are people we pay money to and benefit from, and therefore it is a business relationship. We are business partners. We are not allies. We do not want the same outcome. But it is strange that the United States now does seem to want the same exact outcome that Saudi Arabia also wants in the region. Isn't that bizarre? Isn't it bizarre how the Saudis want Iran to be isolated and to prevent them from gaining any kind of hegemony, and so does the United States? The balance of power in the Middle East apparently is going to sit and rest in these Gulf states. But the West has made a deal with the devil. They have made a deal with the devil with OPEC. They have made a deal with the devil with Saudi Arabia, the partnerships that we have with these countries. And this is why Senator Rand Paul, who is running for the president, no doubt he'll be making his announcement, I think, on April 7th. That's the latest word, that he'll be providing a announcement on April 7th regarding his candidacy. Of course, Ted Cruz just announced, and we just saw this on, I watched the whole 30-minute for free on YouTube. I think we put it up on our website. If we didn't, we need to, so people can see it, where Ted Cruz is, appealing to the conservative base, appealing to the people of faith, presenting from Liberty University, the largest evangelical university in the world, and appealing to the Republican Party and appealing to the conservative base, suggesting that a President Cruz will really solve a lot of America's ills. And it sounds as if the way that he plans to solve the ills in America will be through lower tax rates, abolishing the IRS. I even think I heard something about ending the Fed. It seems this message is catching on. Whoever actually gets the nomination and ends up running for president on the Republican ticket, they're not able to put an establishment candidate on the ticket, then they're going to get somebody like Rand Paul, or maybe even like Ted Cruz, who is open to the idea of abolishing the IRS, open to the idea of ending the Fed. And that's a positive development, I think, for America to have that potential, that possibility. Of course, old nutty Uncle Ron Paul, who the mainstream media just hated with a tremendous vitriol. They just despised Ron Paul, and they were constantly blacking him out because he was making statements like this. These statements used to be considered crazy. This idea of end the Fed or end the IRS. The Republicans were always known as the party, at least for many, many years, as the party who wanted to close the Department of Education. They were always big on the Department of Education used to be the bullseye of the Republican Party. It used to be the Obamacare of the Republican Party. They hated the Department of Education. It was too big. It was a bad idea to have government involved in training the federal government in Washington and in charge of your children's education. It just didn't make sense. That's not the purpose of Washington. That's not the purpose of these legislative bodies. Why would they be concerned with wanting to teach and program the kids? It seemed like it's a negative idea, and I still hold to that. I still believe that the concept of government education, or education as dictated from the federal government in Washington, is a really bad idea. Just a really bad idea. And so anyway, Rand Paul, I'm getting back to my point here. Rand Paul, April 7th, planning on making an announcement, and he himself knows that he's in a struggle here with Hillary Clinton. It seems as if some have written off Hillary Clinton as a potential nominee on the Democratic ticket because of her age or because of her baggage that she has, and that's completely understandable. However, I think that Rand Paul is smart to be paying attention to the fact that the Clintons are a very, very tough crowd, and they're going to be able to handle a whole lot of the stuff that the media is going to sling at them. So I think he is rightfully trying to aim his gun at Hillary Clinton, knowing that she's the likely nominee. I don't see too many people on the Democratic side who they're going to run. I can't think of too many people. They've been pushing this O'Malley, but I can't see that. Of course, Obama came out of nowhere. Remember, Clinton had the name back in 2008, and Obama did not have the name, but he came along and won the day. And he was, pretty much a dark horse, came out of nowhere. So we could see something like that, I guess, on the Democratic side. However, it does seem that the media has anointed Clinton to be the Democratic nominee. So we'll just kind of pay attention to that. However, Hillary was recently under fire by Rand Paul for accepting donations to her family's foundation from Saudi Arabia, Qatar, UAE, some of these nations that have terrible human rights records. And his suggestion was basically that she should give the money back. In fact, we have a little clip here. Let's roll the tape.
Today I'm calling for Hillary Clinton to return the money to Saudi Arabia, to Brunei, to the United Arab Emirates. All of these countries appear to have a war on women, and I think it's unconscionable. In Saudi Arabia, a woman that was raped was then tried, convicted, and given 90 lashes. I don't know how Hillary Clinton can condone that or accept that money. I think she should immediately send the money back. In Brunei, if you're accused of adultery, you can be stoned to death in a country where women don't vote and don't sit on juries. I think it's inexcusable that she accepts money from this kind of country. United Arab Emirates, a woman reported that she was raped by 3 men, and she was given 8 months in prison and only got out after international pressure. These are countries with policies that are horrific towards women's rights, and I think it's unconscionable that Hillary Clinton's accepting donations from them.
So a pretty predictable and actually pretty creative attack on Hillary Clinton, and we'll see how much traction he gets with that. It seems like he's been trying to get Saudi Arabia in the news because we just saw another headline that we have in our show notes today about Saudi Arabia. Let's see, Rand Paul calling for a boycott on Saudi Arabia, saying that the United States should not be promoting these nations with human rights, atrocious human rights records. And this is exactly what Sweden did. Sweden, as I mentioned earlier, had stood up to Saudi Arabia over its dismal human rights record, and then it was immediately scolded by the rich oil sheiks in Riyadh. In fact, they were summoned. Diplomats were summoned to Riyadh by Saudi Arabia, and they were told in no uncertain terms that they would be losing all of their business visas from their country, that no more business would be conducted with Sweden, and so they were fighting back with their money, basically with their bank book, and they were saying, "Look, we're going to, if you want to do this to us, then we're going to do this back to you, tit for tat." And this is how Saudi Arabia apparently is going to react to calls for it to live up to the same standards that it's calling everyone else to live up to, right? Saudi Arabia doesn't have any right to be telling other nations how to dictate their foreign policy. I mean, whatever Saudi Arabia thinks about Iran is their problem. And if they don't like them, they should have to deal with them, but they shouldn't be dragging us into it. And Iran, in particular, a country that has a long track record of having good relations with the West. That may seem bizarre for you to believe. I want you to think about this, just to show you how completely completely the corporate control mainstream media has blinded you to the fact about, the fact that even Iranians are humans. Think about the last time you saw a nice human interest story about an Iranian person. Can you think of any Iranian individual that you've seen profiled in the news in a really good way, in a really good light? And if you answer no, then you have to ask yourself, why? Well, the answer, according to the media, is because they're subhuman mongrels, right? They're not worthy of having any kind of human interest stories done about them because they're subhuman. That's the way they galvanize people towards war. They always try to teach you that you're superior and everybody else is not. And that's how they're able to coalesce the nation to drive them to war. Here's what I think that, if you want to solve some of the issues here in America, and I know that, trying to reform this nation is like trying to turn around the Titanic. It's got a hole in the bottom of it. Why in the world would you spend any time? I guess, as you see all of these things, there are some common sense observations that you make, but you also realize that common sense will never actually survive all the way down to Washington. So it's very unlikely that these things would ever be implemented. But, one example would be to reinstate the draft. This is exactly how you end the war. And I hate to give that power to Washington. And some people would say, oh, the draft. Why in the world would you suggest the draft? Why in the world would you ever want to see that come back? Well, I tell you this, if people know that they might have to be called up to go to war, they might be a little less angry with other nations and want to actually try to use diplomacy to solve issues. But right now, as long as the military men who've gone in to get a free college education are willing to go over there and, wear fatigues and run around with guns in the middle of the desert, and you don't have to have any sweat off your back, what do you care? Bomb Iran, blacktop the roads while you're there, right? What do you care? But if you might be drafted, if you might actually be called into service of your country, and suddenly you find out that, there's a threat, you're going to size that threat up a little more before you get all gung-ho and ready to go put boots on. Here's the other thing, and this is no doubt sarcastic, and of course I realize that. I say this a bit in jest. But those who, are so gung-ho about, seeing Iran, nuked off the face of the planet, why don't we give them an opportunity to board a helicopter and be taken over to Iran, and we'll give them a gun, and we'll give them, the fatigues. We'll give them some meals so that they can survive for a while, and we'll let them loose. Why don't we think about these kinds of things? Why don't we? The whole nation doesn't necessarily want to go to war every single time somebody won't take our dollar. At some point, you begin getting tired of this, and the American people don't think it's about the dollar. They think it's about Israel, and they think it's about nuclear weapons in Iran. Well, if they really, and I'm telling you this, for those of you who are offended by me saying this, I want you to think about this. You got to prove me wrong on this in order for you to really be angry at me. Because I'm telling you, Saudi Arabia, if you type in Saudi Arabia nuclear weapons Pakistan, they have had numerous secret meetings that the U.S. no doubt knows about. And we know that the father of the nuclear industry in Pakistan gave away secrets to many different countries, including Saudi Arabia. So Saudi Arabia, apparently, based on all the good intelligence that we have now, has within Pakistan, we don't think that they've been delivered to Saudi Arabia. It's probably a bad idea for the Saudis to have nukes in their country, considering that all the oil is there. It might be a bad idea. So they're keeping them in Pakistan, but they can be used at any time and called upon, and they've probably already been paid for by the Saudis, according to the latest intelligence. So if this whole thing, the way that it has been portrayed in the media, is about Islamic jihadists, right? And that's what we keep hearing, right? It's all about Islamic jihadists, and President Obama won't say it. How come he won't say that it's Islamic jihadists? Well, maybe because the number one financier and exporter of Islamic jihad is Saudi Arabia. Maybe he doesn't want to upset our allies. I mean, that could be a possible answer. I mean, after all, our best friend in the Middle East is not Israel, it's Saudi Arabia. They pay the bills. And so it's possible that the president is not interested in offending the Saudi Arabian people, and especially the Saudi royals. I mean, he practically bowed down to them whenever he met with them several years ago. And we know that the U.S. has a tremendous dependence upon Saudi Arabia. There's a book called The House of Bush and the House of Saud. I think it's by Craig Unger. Can't remember the author's name. But that's an unreal book. If you read that book and it doesn't change the way that you see Washington and the Near East, you didn't read it. It is a powerful book that exposes a lot of lies that we have been told over the years about the Middle East and the U.S. Relations with the Middle East. But if the overall problem is that there are nuclear weapons that Iran might have, and you don't trust Iran with nuclear weapons, then you have to explain why you trust Saudi Arabia with nuclear weapons. You see, I'm not defending Iran. I am simply pointing out that Saudi Arabia is a more imminent threat because it already has nuclear weapons and it already hates Israel. In fact, the latest report that I saw, the Muslim World Journal reported this month that King Salman had stated that his greatest priority, his first priority in foreign policy, is to see the establishment of the Palestinian state. We reported earlier on this month that Saudi Arabia is now the world's largest arms importer. That is the world's greatest terrorist financier and exporter. The greatest exporter of terrorism is now also the world's largest importer of world armaments, military equipment. And the world says nothing. No, the world does say something. It says, look at Iran, who has no nukes. And who wants the world to pay attention to that? Well, of course, Saudi Arabia. Who stands the most to lose if Iran is able to develop any kind of regional hegemony in the area? It's a power struggle. That's why the number 2 owner of the parent company of Fox News, News Corporation, is Prince Alawid bin Talal. He is a Saudi royal and is the number 2 owner in News Corporation, which owns Wall Street Journal, Fox News, and many other media outlets. And so he has a tremendous amount of control. In fact, we know that bin Talal and Rupert Murdoch, who is the CEO of News Corp, are good friends. Bin Talal stood by Rupert Murdoch during the whole British media scandal that they went through with one of his papers over there. So he's been a good friend to News Corp, and I'm sure News Corp owes him something. And there are reports, numerous reports you can find about this if you just Google it, from well-established news organizations, even claiming that Rupert Murdoch had opted to change and edit his programming based upon personal calls from Prince bin Talal. So I'm no friend of Iran, but I'm no friend of Saudi Arabia either. I don't think that either country has anybody's best interest at heart except their own, just like every other country on the face of the planet. Another story that just went totally unreported that hit Breitbart. Bank records reveal Saudi elites gave millions to Boston Marathon bombers' mosque. The Zarnev boys, one of whom is dead now, the other currently on trial for terrorism charges from his role in the Boston Marathon bombings, was known to pray at the Islamic Society of Boston, the mosque in Cambridge, Massachusetts, which according to this report was founded by an al-Qaeda operative and funded with money from Saudi Arabia. Newsweek magazine reporting that the Zarnev brothers became radicalized after they started attending this mosque. But not a word in the mainstream press. That's what happens to these stories. They'll come out. People will say, well, why would the mainstream media talk about something like that if it's just going to expose them? But you have to realize that there's an old saying in marketing where you have to hear something 7 times for it to stick. And a story can come out in an obscure magazine, or it can come out even in a semi-popular magazine, but repetition is how you form and shape and fashion the masses. So you have to put it out over and over and over and over and over. And it needs to have the vibe that somehow you're superior and the other person is not, and somehow they are inferior to you. And it's very easy to believe that. Our minds want to believe that. We want to already believe that we're better than other people. I think it's part of the human experience. It's unfortunate perhaps because it's a sign of hubris or pride, but it is nevertheless hard to deny that we all desire to have that thought that we are better than other people. And all throughout history, we see this. I mean, here in America, white people thought they were better than black people. White people thought they were better than red people. In other areas, black people think they're better than others. In other places, red people think they're better than others. And this is just a part of the human experience. And unfortunately, it's been such a part of the human psyche that the marketers of this evil in Washington are able to manipulate that amongst the American people and get them to think that they are superior. Same thing that we saw in Nazi Germany, same thing we saw in fascist Italy. It's no different. All throughout history, you see the same MO used and employed by the people at the top, although with variations along the way. But in essence, always appealing to that same primal instinct that I'm superior and you're not. And governments have learned how to play this very, very well and leverage it and use it against the populations to get their support for whatever they want to support, for any country they want to target. And the U.S. has been extremely proficient at manipulating the American people, its population, in coercing it to do what it wants, to help it, support, where it would be against Iran, but for Saudi Arabia. You've really got to think about how clever that is. How did the U.S. get? How did they make that happen? How do they get all the public angry about Islamic jihadism, but they're buddies with Saudi Arabia? Isn't that bizarre? I mean, you really got to hand it to the marketers in Washington and the mainstream media that's corporate controlled by 6 multinational corporations. You've really got to give them a hand, because they have been able to manipulate the people's mind of this country so much to the point where they fear radical Islamic jihadism, and they want to take down Iran and prevent that country, which doesn't have any nuclear weapons and is completely surrounded by countries that have nuclear weapons and lives in a neighborhood that is probably the most dangerous on earth and desires to have nuclear weapons like all of its neighbors. It's a very natural desire. And somehow America has been able to convince us that that person who has no nuclear weapons needs to be preemptively struck. Basically, Iran says, look, I live in this neighborhood, and I know that I don't fit in real well because I believe really weird things and everybody else believes something else, and I know that I'm kind of weird, but I want to have a gun too. Everybody else has a gun, I want to have a gun. And all the guys who have guns look at the guy who doesn't have a gun and say, no, we don't trust you with a gun. And he says, well, I don't trust you either without a gun, right? And it's a circular argument. But the guys who have the guns say, no, we're right, you're wrong, we don't want to hear anything about it, or we're going to shoot you, right? And this is where we are. This is the madness that has been promoted to us through the corporate-controlled mainstream media. They are trying to form and fashion the Middle East according to their tastes and preferences, and they're using you and your support to do it. You're a pawn on this global chessboard. They want you to march to their orders. They want you to march to their beat. Hi friends, Jerry Robinson here. I want to tell you about our Christian Financial Advisor Network. The Christian Financial Advisor Network, or CFAN, is a network of faith-based financial planners that I created back in 2010. I personally select each of the advisors within the network, and we now have advisors covering 45 states. So whether you are needing help preparing for retirement or are just wanting the most competitive prices on life insurance, we have a faith-based advisor who can help you. Each of our faith-based advisors agree fully with the FTM Daily philosophy and our own 5 levels of financial freedom, and will help you take the next steps towards financial security. And best of all, the service is completely free. That's right, you will never have to pay to speak with one of our advisors or to simply ask a question. To get started, schedule a 100% free consultation with one of our advisors right now online by going to ftmdaily.com/CFAN. That's CFAN. ftmdaily.com/CFAN. Get retirement help and the best life insurance rates from like-minded professionals who are waiting to assist you by contacting the Christian Financial Advisor Network. Log on right now to ftmdaily.com/CFAN and get your financial questions answered today. Friends, let 2015 be the year that you begin your journey towards financial security for both you and your family. That's ftmdaily.com/CFAN. right, friends, well, that brings us to the end of our program. Thank you so much for choosing to allow us into your life each week right here on this broadcast. And as always, I leave you with this final word, this time spoken by the legendary investor and philanthropist, Sir John Templeton, when he said, "The four most dangerous words in investing are, this time it's different." Just something to think about. Remember, friends, when you want the truth about the global economy, just follow the money. Have a safe and prosperous week, and we'll see you right back here, God willing, next Tuesday. Until then, God bless.
All of the information contained on the Follow the Money podcast is strictly for informational and educational purposes. It should not be construed as specific investment advice. The views and opinions of our guests and sponsors, including Tom Cloud, are their own and do not necessarily represent the views of FTMDaily.com or Robinson Media Group, LLC. Jerry Robinson does hold an insurance license and at times may offer consulting on life insurance and fixed retirement income products. Follow-up, individualized responses to email or phone requests that involve the rendering of personalized investment advice for compensation will not be made absent compliance with state investment advisor registration requirements or an applicable exemption or exclusion and applicable insurance regulations. Past performance is not indicative of future results. You should be aware of the real risk of loss in following any strategy or investment discussed on the podcast. Remember, never do your financial planning through podcast or radio. It's your money. Be wise.